I'm Ayla.
And I'm Andy.
And welcome to Sinister Dynasty. Today, we are going to be talking about the murder of Beatrice Mabel Jones and the killing of Walter Bolton. Walter James Bolton, known as Jim, was born the 13th of August 1888 in Mangamahu, Whanganui district. And so his parents were Amos Bolton and Emma Bolton. He had between 6 and 8 siblings. I could not confirm what that number really was.
6 and 8's a good guess there.
So when he was 10, he started working on farms. He was soon promoted to be a fencer and then a contract worker.
Mm-hmm.
So Jim married Beatrice Mabel Jones in 1913. At the time of the incident, he was managing a sheep farm. Beatrice was born in 1891. When was he born? Okay, anyway, in Whanganui to parents, William Henry Jones, who was 26 when she was born, and Constance Matilda Collard, who was 29. So she was the youngest of 4 daughters so the daughters were Lilith, Evelyn and Florence.
Ooh, very Catholic.
I know, but how cool is that?
Yeah.
Florence's first husband had died in the First World War while in active duty. So in 1919, Lilith passed away for an unknown reason. She left behind her 5-week-old daughter, who was named Leonie. So Leonie's was raised by Florence.
Okay.
Because this is very past tense, not currently. She's not currently being raised by Florence.
Thanks for the clarification.
You're welcome. So, this is going to seem like it's a wee bit about Florence, but it's about Beatrice and Jim. So just bear with.
You can tell that this is an older case with
Yeah.
all these names.
Yep. Okay. So Florence later married a guy called William, who passed away from a heart attack in 1953. So in 1921, Jim's brother Thomas was admitted to Porirua Mental Hospital as he was unable to care for himself. He was later moved full-time to Kingset Psychiatric Hospital. He was finally moved to the Auckland Lunatic Asylum, where he passed away on March 1934. Over the years, Beatrice and Jim grew their family. They had 6 children together: Grace, Cecile, Constance, James, Francis, Ellen and Ian. In 1924, Beatrice was diagnosed with diabetes and psoriasis.
We talked about diabetes in the previous episode.
Due to her diabetes, she had to maintain a strict diet. Her psoriasis caused her to have trouble sleeping, and she was prescribed a sleeping tonic to help her with this. I wonder what that tonic was.
Gin tonic.
No idea. It would have been like
cocaine.
Yeah. In 1926, Jim's sister Florence, so Jim and Beatrice had a sister each called Florence, was suffering from chronic schizophrenia with rapid decline and was admitted to the Porirua Mental Hospital, then transferred to King's Seat, where she remained until she passed away. In 1928, Jim was hired to manage a farm called Rusthall, where they lived for the next 2 decades. In 1949, Evelyn passed away also, leaving Beatrice and Florence.
Okay.
So Lilith has died, Evelyn has died, so they are Beatrice's other sisters.
Yeah.
And then Jim's brother Thomas has died, Jim's sister Florence has died. Everyone's dead.
Pretty right.
And the murder hasn't even happened yet.
So these aren't murders.
No, these are just deaths that are going to relate back further in the case.
Yeah, because they're all a bit weird. There's
I
lots
know,
of them.
I know, it's so out of date, but that's just in the order of them. And then, when did Beatrice die? Yeah, so that all happened before Beatrice.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So Beatrice for the past year had come down with a strange, undiagnosable illness. She constantly had bouts of vomiting, violent attacks of indigestion and diarrhea, while having symptoms of numbness in her feet and tingling in her fingers. During this time, Beatrice's sister Florence moved into the Bolton home to help care for her. In Beatrice's worst attacks, she was in crippling pain and taken to hospital, where her state quickly improved. On December the 2nd, 1954, Beatrice went to her doctor as she was suffering from mid-abdominal pains and violent attacks of indigestions, with pains through her back. They x-rayed her thinking it could be gallstones, but there were no traces.
Okay, I'm just going to interrupt, and I could be a detective with this. Is there poison involved?
Dun, dun, dun.
Ah!
They x-rayed... hold on, where was I? You've thrown me off. Okay, so no gallstones. So Beatrice suffered another attack 3 months later with vomiting. This attack went on for a long time. For the next 10 months, she would regularly suffer from violent attacks. It was unclear the cause of these attacks. So they made the decision to remove her gallbladder.
Keep in mind, this is quite a few years ago, so that wouldn't have been the best.
No. 2 months later, in January 1956, the attack started again. She was once again admitted to the hospital on the 11th of January 1956, where she was in hospital. When she was in the hospital, her condition improved. When she was moved to Braemar Hospital in Hamilton, for that Braemar Lodge.
Oh, that's what I was thinking, yeah.
A much nicer place than the hospital.
For our Kiwi listeners, go there, it's really good.
Braemar Lodge in Hamner.
Yeah.
So she was moved to Braemar Hospital in Hamilton. This was a private facility which Jim funded. So he paid more than... So he didn't fund the entire thing. He funded Beatrice's stay, though. He didn't,
Thank you.
fund the hospital. Sorry. I'm trying to read,
No, you're right.
So he paid more than £500 in private medical fees in the hope of curing her. So £500 in 1956. So that would have been a lot of money.
Yeah.
So in June of the same year, she was released from hospital and taken to 7 Kepa Street, Wanganui. This was Florence's home. Within half an hour, Beatrice again started to feel sick and vomited. Her condition worsened over the months, and on the 10th of July 1956, she fell into a coma and was taken urgently to hospital, passing away the next day. It's dodgy.
Yeah.
So when the discussion of an autopsy came up to finally understand what Beatrice's mystery illness was, and to have something to write on the death certificate, because that's important.
Yeah, very.
Jim consulted Beatrice's family, and they made their disapproval very clear.
About what?
About not wanting. They did not want a autopsy done.
Ah, that's even.
But Jim did.
Okay.
So I'm not sure who Beatrice's family is, because it appears majority of them are dead.
Yeah.
So if that's just Florence or what, I don't know. Wasn't very clear.
Yeah.
So, but Jim went against their wishes for his own peace of mind, and an autopsy was done. When the report came back, it showed traces of arsenic in her organs, which over time had debilitated her to the point of death.
Called it.
What gave it away? Is it going off? No. Okay, cool. July the 12th, 1956, the Wanganui police were contacted about the poisoning of Beatrice. Detective Burton Beveridge visited Jim and Florence. So where Jim told the detective he had spent his life savings to get his wife well. So that's the first time that the police were contacted and had talked to Jim and Florence. So Jim took Detective Burton through the farm to look for arsenic, where they found Young's improved sheep dip. So this was a powder. The label read arsenic poison.
What?
Okay, sheep dip is something that they use though. So they fill a trough with water,
Yeah.
put sheep dip in it, dip the sheep in it to get rid of their lice and their whatever, and fleas and things that sheep have.
Yeah.
So like, he works on a sheep farm.
Yeah. And it's called arsenic poison.
No, it had the label arsenic poison on it.
Yeah.
So when Jim was asked about why the packet had been opened, he said he had given some to his grandson Robert to use on possum skins. So I'm assuming he'd be curing possum skins.
Yeah.
Assuming.
Yeah.
A few weeks later, Detective James Murray was dispatched from Wellington to take over the case. Over the next few days, detectives went through the Rust Hall farm looking for other medicines and confiscating the sheep dip. Jim was asked why his wife... no, he wasn't. Jim was asked if his wife kept a diary, to which he responded, "Diaries are dangerous things if they fall into the hands of the wrong people. The boss might get a hold of it." 7 Keeper Street was also visited, where Jim answered the door. They wanted to ask Florence about Beatrice's diary, and they were met with the claim that Florence couldn't come to the door as she wasn't feeling well. The police had heard that Beatrice had made an entry into her diary from one of their daughters, so one of Jim and Beatrice's daughters.
Yeah.
Oh no, one of their daughter-in-laws. So one of their child partners.
Okay.
Now I understand what one means by saying they are broken-hearted.
So one of the policeman's partner's children.
No, so the police had heard that Beatrice made an entry into her diary from one of the daughters-in-laws.
From one of the daughters-in-law. Oh, okay.
No,
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Okay. So the entry said, once again, now I understand what one means by saying they are broken-hearted.
Yeah. Okay.
The police approached Jim again, asking for the diary. Jim said that someone must have taken it away from the home, or that Beatrice may have burnt it. When questioned about how he thought the arsenic got into Beatrice's system, Jim knew that she wouldn't have taken it herself and didn't commit suicide with arsenic, and he didn't think Florence had anything to do with the poisoning. When the detective suggested that it only left him, Jim said again that he had spent his life savings trying to save his wife. Why would he do this to her, and how would he even have the means?
Because he's got more money. Do they have life insurance policies?
I don't know.
Oh.
Yeah. Oh, actually, I think that comes back in. So, throughout their discussion with Florence, they had decided that Jim would have been able to poison her through her tea, as this was always served to her by Jim. This was also confirmed by Jim, who said that he would make his wife tea every day. That's so nice.
Well, that's a very nice
Minus
thing.
the arsenic.
Yeah, minus the arsenic. And that makes sense as well. If she went home and then 30 minutes later she was...
She didn't go home though, she went to 7 Keeper Street.
Home, yeah. Quotation marks.
Hold on, that's going to come back in.
Okay.
Even several times... Oh, okay, so he made her tea even several times a day.
Ew.
Good husband.
Yeah.
It was decided that Jim was using the sheep dip powder in the tea to poison his wife. Dun, dun, dun. While Beatrice was in the hospital, she had not vomited once, but upon returning to her sister's residence, she began vomiting again.
Right.
Jim denied that Beatrice had eaten or drinking anything that day before she began vomiting again. With this theory, the police began finding evidence on why Jim poisoned his wife. So they started targeting their findings at Jim.
Which can make... That goes back to the Cursed Jensen thing though, doesn't it? Like they said that there was a white truck involved, so everyone focused on the white truck.
And then, yeah.
Yeah. Ooh. Oh, this is getting good.
So while interviewing Grace, the Bolton's oldest daughter, she recalled an interaction she had with her father on the 18th of August while she was staying with him at Rust Hall. So, Jim said, "I suppose your aunt and I have done it between us." Grace asked, "Done what? I do not understand." He replied, "About your mother." Grace didn't ask for any further clarification as she was very uncomfortable. So during her stay with her father, she was also given an envelope with $50 in it. She said that it felt like she was being brought. She also recounted other behaviours that her father had begun, heavily drinking, and became agitated at the mention of his wife's name. At this stage, he was prescribed sleeping medication.
Okay.
However, in a different light, the agitation and the heavy drinking and the not sleeping, he's just lost his wife.
Yeah, you can see it. You can see it both ways.
Yeah, you can see it both ways.
Yeah.
So detectives revisited Florence at 7 Keeper Street. I keep referencing the street.
Yeah.
I don't know why.
Yeah.
To interview her for her side of the story. She admitted that she needed to get something off her chest, that she did have Beatrice's diary at her residence,
Did Jim know?
but burnt it after Jim told her to.
Oh.
Florence also confessed, after my husband died on the 6th of July 1953, I had my niece and her family stopping with me for some 18 months, and after they left, Mr. Bolton used to visit me. So that's Jim.
Yeah.
Jim told me how he used to like me and how he used to give me gifts. About 12 months before his wife died, he visited me at my home on one evening, and he persuaded me to be intimate with him. How the fuck? We had sexual intercourse together on a few occasions over a few months. And then I came to my senses and asked Jim to leave me alone.
You paused at the really wrong time, and then I came to my senses.
Leave that in there. That's a plot twist. So she came to her senses and she asked Jim to leave her alone and just let's be good friends.
Yeah.
From then on, he did not have sexual intercourse with me. In reference to the gifts from Jim, he had given me money and gifts which would amount to possibly £250.
Which again is quite a lot.
He paid me £50 towards a combination range in about the early 1955. Oh my god! And was purchased from Mr. Burt Cox. He also gave me £20 towards the buying of new carpet from Wanganui East Furniture Factory on my birthday, the 9th of April 1955. There was also a big plumbing bill with Wadey Brothers for £90 in November 1954. On this occasion there were 2 accounts and Mr. Bolton had paid most of the bills. In between the times he and his wife had given me money, as they knew I was always hard up for money, but he had not given me money for some months, and not since Mrs. Bolton went to hospital. I never told Beatrice about the money he had given me because he asked me not to. There was never any upsets with my sister and myself, and she had no knowledge that Mr. Bolton had been intimate with me. The only reason I weakened to him was probably due to the fact that I was very lonely after my husband died. So Jim was called into the room and given this new information. Florence also added, I only wanted your friendship. You should not have dragged me down like this. To which Jim replied, what of it?
What of it?
What's
up, bro?
What of it? We're only human. Well, I suppose I could have gone up the street and gotten what I wanted.
Oh my god.
At this point, detectives had already made up their minds that Jim was guilty.
Yeah.
In Sherwood Young's book, Guilty on the Gallows, he writes, in his final report of analysis of Miss Bolton's body specimen, a pathologist, I can't even word.
Wait, can I interrupt you there? So her family didn't want to get an autopsy, but
Yep.
Jim did?
Yep.
Okay.
Carrying on.
Okay.
So he had recovered 94 milligrams of arsenic. The police, that was in her body.
Yeah.
The police, in their consideration of the evidence in mid-September, believed that the poison had first been administered about the same time as Bolton had been first administered about the same time as Jim began his relationship with his sister-in-law. They considered the fact that Mr. Bolton was in the habit of making his wife cups of tea. Each time she suffered from her violent vomiting attacks, he was either present with her or in the vicinity. I mean, they're married, so.
Yeah.
On some occasions, he had been the only person present. Florence had a freehold house, and Jim may have already started to move in his own mind, even before his wife's death, by helping improve the property.
Wait, but she wanted to be friends with him though, right? So why would he move in?
Did she? Or is she just saying that?
That is true.
Right, carry on. With these factors in mind, Sub-Inspector Murray and Detective Sergeant Beveridge went to the farm again on Saturday the 22nd of September.
Mr. Bevy.
where they arrested Walter James Bolton. At 9:20am on charges of murdering his wife at Wanganui on the 11th of July 1956. Jim Bolton's only comment, "Oh yes."
Oh yes.
So the trial began the 26th of November 1956 at the Wanganui Supreme Court. The jury was all male and from Jim's hometown.
Right.
Records show that 8 jury members on the panel for the trial refused to take part but were compelled to do so by a judge. The defence argued that the evidence from the Crown does not prove homicidal intent. The defence argued that the sheep dip pit containing 15,000 litres of contaminated water was emptied on a small embankment which connected to the fresh water spring that the Boltons used to drink from, because it was their drinking water, but not the arsenic, causing small amounts of arsenic poisoning over a long period of time. And because Beatrice already was in a weakened state, she was affected the greatest.
Right.
The Crown showed evidence that Beatrice had received a large dose of arsenic the day before she had died. Tests were taken of the water and it was confirmed that it was contaminated by arsenic, but it was argued that the levels were too low to cause death. Right. This proved their argument that it could not have been accidental.
Yeah.
Evidence was shown that Jim made statements to the police at the time that they were not shared with the jury, that he had suffered from erectile dysfunction, which affected the relationship he had with Florence. I don't know how true that is, but yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
This is the facts. Or whatever.
Yeah,
I don't know.
What the Google said.
It's what the Google said. So this is from a whole heap of sources. So.
Okay, yeah.
The Crown also used in their argument that Jim murdered Beatrice so his affair with Florence could continue. The defence argued, "Can you believe this was a sufficient motive for what the Crown says is a vile murder?" The Crown responded, "What greater motive is there but sex?"
Money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A few things.
Yeah.
On the 5th of December, 9 days after the trial began, the jury retired to make their decision. 2 hours, 10 minutes later, the jury had made their decision.
That was just quite fast, I think.
Very fast.
Especially with the ongoing, it's now finished, the Johnny and Amber Heard trial. It took days to deliberate, so for reference.
So they had found Walter James Bolton guilty of murder. When asked by Justice Discretion if he had any reason a sentence to death be passed on him, Jim said, "I plead not guilty, sir." Experts agree arsenic does not accumulate in the organs of the body, so it would have had to be a regular ongoing thing. Yeah. Jim was found guilty of poisoning his wife and sentenced to death.
Oh.
On the 1st of... it's going to get crazy. On the 1st of February 1957, an appeal was later lodged. The appeal court found that Jim had been properly convicted, as Jim had no other options to prove his innocence. His execution was set for 4 p.m, 18th of February 1957. At the age of 68, Jim was taken to Mount Eden Prison in Auckland. Heavily sedated, Mr. Bolton was read his last rites by the local clergyman. What happened next is not confirmed, and there are many theories on what happened. Most commonly told events are described by a local newspaper. On the scaffold, a rope was placed around his neck. When the trapdoor snapped beneath him, he dropped, surviving the fall. No. Sickening the small audience of reporters, clergy, and prison wardens. Many vomited. The man continued to hang, writhing slowly, strangled to death.
Ooh.
Police officer Bill Bryan, who was 20 years old at the time, was working at Mount Eden prison station and also attended Walter's execution, disagrees with the botched hanging account. Bill recounted his side of events. He said to me, "You've drawn the short straw. You're going to an execution." Sub-Inspector Mel Parker, Sergeant Carter and I went to Mount Eden prison. Parker stayed outside of the prison and said, "You won't feel like any tea." Sergeant Carter and I met Prison Superintendent Hayward and a party of officials inside. Our job was to ensure that the formalities of the property sheet and the public trust documents were attended to. When we went to the condemned cell, where Bolton was there with his daughter, he signed the 2 documents and said, "Is this it then?" There was a carpet between the cell and the compound where I could see the scaffold with railway tarpaulins covering an area beneath it. On the tarpaulin there was a message: "New Zealand Railway offers a reward of £5 for the return of this tarpaulin."
Why is he saying that? It's so insignificant.
I don't know, but it is so funny because it's like a prison.
Yeah.
And it's like got nothing to do with the railway.
And they've stolen it.
We arrived early and the trapdoor was tested before the execution. Other officials spoke to Bolton after us. People I recall being present were the sheriff, the superintendent, prison doctor, a chaplain. When the time came, Bolton came out of his cell. He was wearing a loose penal institution garment, some sort of leggings and footwear similar to moccasins, with the restraining clothing holding his arms across the front.
Mm-hmm.
A prison officer was on either side of him. The hangman was at the scaffold. He was not recognisable that night because of his clothing. Once on the scaffold, there was some difficulty getting Bolton's feet into the right position over the trap. After the noose was put around his neck, a white cloth hood was put over his head. When the sheriff gave the signal, the hangman moved the lever. The trap hinges squeaked and there was a loud metallic clang as the trapdoor opened. Bolton disappeared from sight behind the tarpaulin. We had to wait a while in the superintendent's office. I had my first sip of whiskey that night. A bottle of Black Label whiskey was produced for us. I did not see any beer. Normally you couldn't get a whiskey for love nor money. There was talk about earlier hangings in this time. After waiting, we went with the prison doctor who had to certify the death. A prison warden released the rope while I supported the body. The body looked about 7 foot long hanging there. The toes were almost touching the ground. The neck had been stretched considerably while the tongue was out of the mouth and looked to be 9 inches long. The cloth had gone right up the side of his head and had been damaged, where the knot had ripped part of his ear off. The neck was a mess. When the rope was removed, the tongue slipped back into the mouth. The inquest was held in the prison superintendent's office with the body in the next room. The undertaker took the body away in a dark old station wagon that didn't look like a hearse. I will never forget this experience. So that was him recounting.
That's a bit gross.
Yeah, I know. Important though.
Mm.
So, did he actually not die when he was hung, or not die straight away when he was hung, or what?
Yeah. So what would the difference be though if he died straight away or if he died after a little bit? What would be the difference?
So they say that when you hang yourself, your neck generally snaps.
Oh yeah, but what's the difference? Why would it matter if he died later or if he died at the time though?
Because it was inhumane.
Oh okay. Well yeah, but of course, yeah.
And, significantly inhumane, so he would have been suffocated.
Oh.
Strangled to death.
Okay, right. So it's the way it happened.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So a post-mortem exam was done on Jim's body. It was discovered that Jim also tested positive for arsenic poisoning. This gave more weight to the arsenic entering the water theory. From this discovery, it had many doubting the guilty plea, which led to the death of who may be innocent. When the New Zealand Labour Party won the 1957 general election, and in effect the capital punishment ended with Jim's execution. The death penalty faced statutory. I know how the word sounds, but it's not coming out.
To sum up though, is that when they got rid of the death?
Yeah, for homicide and most other crimes when the Parliament passed the Crimes Act in 61.
Wow, so it was because of him really that they got rid of it.
Hold on. In the parliamentary debate about the death penalty in 61, Jim's case was referenced by 2 Labour MPs as an executed murderer whose guilt was doubted by the council, his doctor and the clergyman who officiated the execution. So there was some hesitance.
Yeah.
The amendment passed in 61, abolishing the death penalty for everything except treason.
Yeah.
In 89, the New Zealand government passed the Death Penalty Act, removing the death penalty as an instrument for justice. So, I thought I had something about National in here. So Labour got rid of it, National brought it back, and then Labour got rid of it again.
National brought it back?
Yeah.
Oh.
So, this is where it gets crazy. So since the event, his son, quotation, James, has since attempted to clear his father's name. James had spent over 15 years trying to do so.
Right.
In 1988, a man, James, claiming to be Jim's son, quotations, splashed red paint over the front of Parliament doors.
Okay.
James, who recently moved to Auckland with his partner and son, was adopted out as a toddler when he was 3.
So he was adopted by Jim?
No.
Okay.
So, 18 months later, he was adopted again by parents Leslie and Madeline Child. James was raised with their other children. At the time of his adoption, he was known as Peter Waller. At the age of 5, I was told my father was in prison for not paying maintenance, so child support. They said that attempts had been made to get my father to sign the adoption papers, but he refused. I didn't really think any more of it until I was 7. 7 or 8, my adopted brother told me he had overheard his parents describing my father as a bad man. Surely being poor in those days and not being able to pay maintenance didn't make someone bad. I was very confused and hurt by those suggestions. I was afraid to discuss it with anyone because it was a taboo subject. So I put the whole thing in the back of my mind and tried to forget my father. I mean, were you having those thoughts when you were 7 or 8?
They're very sophisticated.
In fact, I never brought up the issue again until 13 years later. 13 years ago, uncannily 30 years to the day when Walter Bolton met his death. I had a real bad, terrifying nightmare. I dreamt I was in Mount Eden prison, awaiting to be hung. I climbed a 20-foot fence to escape, but they recaptured me. It was horrific. Sickening dream which had a huge impact on me. That day I heard on the radio that it was 30 years to the day that the last man in New Zealand was hung, and a huge shiver ran down my spine and it got me thinking. I knew my father was in jail at the time and he refused to sign over the adoption papers, but I had never heard anything more from him the whole time I had been alive. I went to the library and pulled the files on the case. All of a sudden, James believed that he had the identities of his parents, yet his mother, Beatrice, would have been 61 at the time when she supposedly had James. Oh no, Margaret. It says Margaret. I don't know who the fuck Margaret is. Anyway, initially I thought it would have been impossible, but I checked all kinds of health records and found other cases both here in New Zealand and overseas of women in their 60s and even 70s giving birth. Speculation.
Yeah.
Objection, speculation.
Yeah.
He confronted his adopted mother, whose response was, "Who bloody told you?" Convinced Walter was his father, James changed his name to the family name and tried to reach out to Walter's oldest son, who said he would talk to his father. A few days later, James rang back and Frank would not confirm or deny what his father had to say. James walked up to the beehive and poured red paint over the steps and reception area to raise awareness in the media. After 10 years of jumping up and down and no one was taking any notice, so I did what I had to. James was sentenced to 6 months in jail and a $2,500 fine. When this was not paid, he was summoned back to court where he was asked why he had not paid. He said, "Would you pay a system that wrongly killed your own father and ruined my life?" Bullshit. No. It was, honestly, it was
He thought he was guilty anyway, though. Like, he said he was guilty, so they were going off that as well.
He didn't say he was guilty.
He said he was, didn't he? He pleaded guilty?
No, I plead not guilty.
Oh.
But,
I said that.
and ruined my life. Like, he didn't know until he was significantly older.
Yeah.
So that didn't ruin your life. So there's no solid proof. I've written that down because I think it's stupid.
Yeah.
So this is a theory of what happened, what actually happened. This isn't actually what actually happened, it's just a theory. So in January 2001, Investigative magazine published an article suggesting that Florence killed her sister and that she also potentially killed others. She also committed suicide after the events. It is said that there is a note that she admitted, but the note was suppressed.
That's what I was thinking at the start, though, because when everyone around Florence died, I was
ready?
like,
Are you ready?
Yeah. Is this what actually happened?
No.
Oh.
This is just carrying on.
Okay.
5 people over 10 years have died under Florence's care at 7 Keppel Street.
Yeah, well, that's what I thought at the start.
Constance Jones, her mother, died of a cerebral hemorrhage, a type of blood clot which was rare in 1946. Florence was the beneficiary of the will.
Ooh.
So William Jones, her father passed away as of the same fate as her mother in 1948.
Yeah.
Florence was also the beneficiary of this will.
See, it just makes sense.
Evelyn Poole, who was his sister, died of cancer in 1949. Thomas Collard, Florence's uncle, died of a cerebral hemorrhage in 1951 while under her care. Collard's nephew Eric has long maintained that Thomas was killed by Florence.
It makes sense.
Florence Dottery wasn't known as Aunt Dolly, so they called her Aunt Dolly.
Okay.
For nothing. She used Dolly as a surname in the New Zealand Poison Register, a mandatory legal requirement for the use for anyone wanting to buy arsenic. It is said that James maintains that Margaret Dolly, New Zealand's most prolific poisoner, supplied Florence with the poison, but Margaret was not discovered until 1965. To end on not such a tragic note, or maybe a very tragic note, Jim was cremated on the 19th of February 57. His ashes were returned to his son, who buried them next to his wife Beatrice. The inscription on the burial plot read, "Walter James Bolton, hanged 1957, an innocent man who died at the hands of justice, never to be tolerated again. Your loving son, Robert James Bolton."
So that was the son that was adopted?
No.
Oh no,
that was his actual son.
Okay, yeah. Well, no, his son, yeah. Okay.
Even though, I don't think I said Robert when I said their children.
That's what's
so I don't know, it's crazy.
Florence from the start though, that was so weird, because at the start it was like one death after another. And
Yeah.
I'm like, that's not right. And it makes sense as well, like maybe she was jealous that's why you said, like, I was like, oh, but she didn't want to be with him, and you were like, oh, actually, I don't know, like, she didn't want to be with Jim, maybe she did. That's a good theory. Especially with being supplied the poison.
I mean, there's a chance that they did it together.
Yeah.
But there's a chance that he did it, and there's a chance that she did it.
And you're very right about that inhumane killing as well. I didn't think of it that way. That's very true. Yeah.
I think
interesting. That was a good case to do.
I thought that's very all over the place in my opinion.
Yeah, but it's good. Like, because there's lots of just information everywhere. That's a real good one to do. I'd never heard of that.
Neither.
Yeah.
And the fact that it was the last person hanged in New Zealand as well was a bit of a plot twist.
Yeah. But it's very interesting because I knew obviously we got rid of the death
penalty.
But that was his one. Interesting.
Yes.
Good case. Good case. Yes.
Alrighty, so we will end this. I'm Ayla.
And I'm Andy.
And this was Sinister Dynasty.